President Trump orders an airstrike on a speedboat in the Caribbean that he says was carrying narcotics traffickers heading toward the United States. As the White House flexes its military might toward Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. Meantime, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un have a friendly meeting at a military parade in Beijing, which Trump seems to think was a visual intended for U.S. consumption.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, columnist Mary Anastasia O'Grady and editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell. President Trump posted a video online Tuesday showing a small vessel exploding, and this is part of what he said on Truth Social. The strike occurred while the terrorists were at sea in international waters transporting illegal narcotics heading to the United States. No U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. Please let this serve as a notice to anybody even thinking about bringing drugs into the United States of America. Here's the president explaining a little bit more about his thinking in the Oval Office on Wednesday.
On the boat, you had massive amounts of drugs. We have tapes of them speaking. It was massive amounts of drugs coming into our country to kill a lot of people. And everybody fully understands that. In fact, you see it. You see the bags of drugs all over the boat. And they were hit. Obviously, they won't be doing it again. And I think a lot of other people won't be doing it again when they watch that tape. They're going to say, let's not do this. We have to protect our country, and we're going to. Venezuela's been a very bad actor. They've been, as you know, they've been sending millions of people into our country, many of them Tren de Aragua, some of the worst gangs, some of the worst people anywhere in the world in terms of gangs. And we had some in Washington, D.C. We took care of them very quickly, but they're out of here. They've gone. But Venezuela's been very bad, both in terms of drugs and sending some of the worst criminals anywhere in the world.
Mary, what do you make of this strike, assuming that the president is right and accurate about the drugs and the gang members on that boat, rather than doing the kind of typical Coast Guard search and seizure?
Kyle, in the intelligence world, there's an expression. They say every once in a while you have to mow the lawn. And I think this was a message to organized crime that while everybody knows they exist and there's a demand for drugs in the U.S., they're not allowed to get this powerful. And so somebody in the Trump administration has decided we have to mow the lawn. And this is a first step toward doing that by sending a message of what the president was really talking about there is deterrence and saying, you know, there are limits to how powerful you can get and how brazen you can get in bringing drugs across the Caribbean to the U.S.
The U.S. has designated some of these transnational cartels, criminal organizations, as foreign terrorist organizations. So that is some of the justification for the strike. I mean, Kate, another way maybe to think about them is kind of like pirates, going through the seas, carrying illegal contraband and drugs and doing violence to people who want to stop them, including civilians. And so, I mean, I have a hard time thinking that this kind of strike would not be warranted as long as the U.S. is confident in its intel on what is on those boats. Because, of course, if you hit a boat with some kind of ordnance, you better be sure what's on it. There's no sort of oopsies if you do a search and seizure.
Yeah, I think those process arguments are a little bit shallow. I mean, the first point to keep in mind is one you made, which is that these organizations are U.S. designated terror groups. And also, this boat posed an immediate threat to the United States. The Secretary of State said that, and that also counsels a more immediate action. But I think in our editorial today, there's also a compelling case that these groups are tools and extensions of the regime in some elements, and that they are assisting Maduro in tools that he uses as elements of national power. And so I think the U.S. has no obligation to continue that more courteous Coast Guard process here. And I think Mary's exactly right that the quick action here does send a deterrent message, not just in the Caribbean, but elsewhere, that the United States is serious about enforcing its interests when it views them as threatened, sometimes immediately and without courteous warning.
Mary, a couple of points here on that thought. Let's start with the specifics on these criminal gangs, and Maduro is in cahoots with them, is he not? I mean, is there any real argument against the U.S. position that Maduro is allowing these gangs to operate, sometimes helping them operate, and that he is responsible for this kind of trafficking happening through the Caribbean off of his coast?
Since February, the administration has designated 9 Latin American foreign terrorist organizations. 6 of them are from Mexico. One of them operates between Central America, El Salvador, and the U.S., and 2 of them are Venezuelan. One of the Venezuelans is called Cartel de los Soles, which means the cartel of the suns. And there's no coincidence that the generals in the Venezuelan military get suns on their uniforms as they move up in rank. We have stars, they have suns. So that cartel is considered to be sort of owned and operated by Maduro. He's the top dog in that organization. But the other one, Tren de Agua, is one that more operates with the complicity of the regime, but maybe not from Maduro himself. It started in the state of Aragua it dates back to at least 2014, a prison rebellion. The gang took over the prison. The governor didn't do anything to stop that, and then they just grew and grew, and these prisoners would come and go from the prison. They began to exert their influence by extorting families that came to the prison, extorting people in the community. I mean, they're really good extortionists. And then they also became very active in the human smuggling business, and they were really, really instrumental in bringing lots of those Venezuelans to the border during the Biden administration that created such havoc. So that's, I think, a very important aspect to what's going on here is that, again, mowing the lawn. I mean, these criminal gangs have gotten very powerful with the permission of the Venezuelan government. And, one example of how the government was in cahoots, they became, in Aragua, they were given charge of the food rations. So they were able to decide who got food, who didn't get food, and tie that to politics and to the power of the regime. So they're really, really connected to the regime in one way or another. And I think that there's a national security, as Kate says, a national security aspect to this that's important to keep in mind.
On the point about the broader message being sent to Venezuela and the Maduro regime, there have been reports of some significant naval assets being sent to the region by President Trump, including a guided missile cruiser, the USS Lake Erie, 3 amphibious ships over there in that area. Kate, give us a sense of how serious is this naval firepower, and how does it compare to the one mission that we've seen in operation so far, which is this strike on this speedboat, essentially? It seems like more firepower here than would be needed for some kind of discrete U.S. attacks on drug labs in the jungle, for example.
That's the top line takeaway. This is not the kind of military force you assemble if you are simply interested in sending a strong message and doing some targeted strikes on a few drug boats. It's simply so much larger than that. I mean, the rough estimates of how many sailors and Marines are down there is about 4,500 to 5,000. That includes those Navy destroyers that you mentioned. And keep in mind, those naval destroyers are in very high demand in the Red Sea, as the Houthis are a problem there. We're also trying to keep them running across the Pacific, a huge area. So they're precious assets, and even more so an attack submarine. The Navy would like to have 66 of those, has all sorts of problems building and maintaining them, and only has about 32 ready to go at any given time. And so using any of those assets really suggests a larger thinking here. And so what that means, this is the kind of force you'd assemble if you were serious about going after the Maduro regime itself. The argument that has been made to me that perhaps Trump is at least considering that is that his view of the world is hemispheric. He may view the Western Hemisphere as different than other parts of the world and how America handles it. I was pointed back to a speech he made in 2020 about Cuba and Nicaragua and saying, we support their fight for liberty and we will work for the day when we're a fully free hemisphere. I mean, he sounds like Reagan at times about the Western Hemisphere and less so about other parts of the world. So that is why I wouldn't completely rule out that he is thinking about something larger or has a larger strategy in how he's approaching this. However, I think the overarching concern is that what this really is a huge use of military readiness when all we're going to do is really some of these targeted drug things and have no larger purpose serve to America's interests than doing some targeted strikes on these drug cartels that you do not need a fast attack submarine to do.
On that point, let's listen to some of the speculation on this. A question to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth yesterday on Fox and Friends.
The only person that should be worried is Nicolás Maduro, who's running effectively as a kingpin of a narco state, not actually elected and indicted for $50 million by the United States. And we know he's involved in the types of drug running that has affected the American people directly. So China and other countries are going to say certain things, and that's their prerogative. What we have there in the Caribbean is a clear demonstration of military might. President Trump has shown, whether it's the Southwest border, whether it's the Houthis in freedom of navigation, whether it's Midnight Hammer in Iran, that the precise application of American power can have incredible impacts and reshape dynamics around the world and in the region. So Nicolás Maduro, as he considers whether or not he wants to continue to be a narco trafficker, has some decisions to make. And that's all I'll say about that.
Is regime change our goal there?
Well, that's a presidential decision, and we certainly understand the indictment. We understand that $50 million. Anyone would prefer that he would just give himself up, but that's a presidential level decision, and we're prepared with every asset that the American military has.
Mary, a few things I think notable there from the defense secretary. One, calling Maduro a drug kingpin, basically, who is not the legitimate elected ruler of Venezuela, and then two, not ruling out regime change actions or pressure on Maduro to go, saying that that's up to the White House and the President of the United States, but the Pentagon is ready to go if need be. What are you hearing from your sources in the region about this?
On the first point, he wasn't exactly breaking news. I mean, long ago we indicted Nicolás Maduro on drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, I think they call it. And there's a $50 million bounty on his head. So we already know that this is how the U.S. characterizes him. With respect to whether we want regime change or not, I think Kate's point about the magnitude of the military assets that we've sent to the region suggests that, we're not just chasing drug traffickers. He has something larger in mind. I think the problem that the U.S. has is that they know that, they could take Nicolás Maduro out in a Soleimani kind of strike. But there's that longstanding problem we always talk about that, if you break it, you better be able to fix it. And they want to know that they're going to be able to stand up a government with military that can defend it if they take Maduro out. And, the opposition has long said that there are many members of the military, maybe not at the very top, but in the higher ranks and among the rank and file that want a change. They don't respect Maduro, and they feel like they work very hard. They get very little money. Their families are hungry. There's an inflation problem. There's a lot of privation. So they would like to see him go. But Venezuela has a very sophisticated counterintelligence system in the military. And these guys are ruthless. And if you get caught batting your eye in the wrong way, they will grab you and torture you and kill you. And they've been doing that for years. So the military is afraid to move, or the elements inside the military that want to change are afraid to move. And the U.S. can't do that much about that except to send signals to them, I suppose, that if they do move, the U.S. would back them up.
On the point about U.S. naval assets being scarce, though, Kate, let's zoom out a bit more. And another notable event this week was a military parade held in Beijing. Xi Jinping there welcoming the leaders of Russia and North Korea, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un. Friendly photo op there. President Trump in the White House said that he thinks they meant for him to be watching, and he was watching. What do you think the message of this is to the United States, and what President Trump's response ought to be?
Well, I think there's two basic points here. I mean, the first one is that an axis of adversaries against the United States is pretty well formed and alive. We had, a photo here of Vladimir Putin with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un, and they are uniting and working together to form a challenge to the United States. I think the selection of a World War II anniversary was no accident and is a testament to how these men are working together to tell a different story about the world since 1945, to diminish the U.S.'s singular role in ending that conflict, in building a largely peaceful world that followed, but also presenting now an alternative to it. That force is alive and well. There has been a lot of discussion about that axis and whether, for instance, the United States can pull them apart, can pull Xi and Putin apart and say, well, President Trump's advisors are very, I think a lot about Nixon's opening to China in 1972, and say, well, let's do a spin on that, and we're going to get Vladimir Putin pulled away from Xi Jinping. I think this parade was a real reminder that there's no rift between these powers right now for us to exploit and try to break them up. And so it is a formidable and generational challenge. The second quick point is just that the military balance of power is eroding against the United States. China has spent the last 20 years just on a ferocious military buildup, perhaps the largest since the beginning of World War II. And some of the kit that was on display here, we saw everything from undersea vehicles that could be very useful in a Taiwan scenario, and also long-range rocket launchers that China wants to use in a Taiwan scenario. But don't think this is just a story about Taiwan, as vital as Taiwan is to the U.S. Some of the, for instance, the new intercontinental ballistic missiles on display, China is building far beyond what it would need to swallow Taiwan, and it is building items with the United States in mind as its enemy. And so I think that really underscores that between this axis and the axis of enemies and the military power they're building, we have a here and now problem, not a distant, we may have a near peer in the 2030s problem. We have an immediate military threat that requires Trump's attention.
Mary, on the point about this axis of adversaries, it does seem like they are increasingly working together. You read stories about Chinese components being found in Russian weapons that are being used in Ukraine, reports about North Korean soldiers on the front lines in Ukraine. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Maduro sort of part of that axis as well? And if there's a message that is being sent by the United States toward Venezuela with this naval power, is that kind of a message also to the rest of the axis?
Yeah, you were mentioning before, or Kate was mentioning, the importance to Trump of strength in this hemisphere. And of course, we used to have something called the Monroe Doctrine, which said that, other countries couldn't come into the hemisphere, that we were the big, the hegemony in the region, and other countries couldn't come in. And that's pretty much been lost. Maduro is famously making drones in Venezuela for Russia. Iran has had, direct flights from Tehran to Venezuela for many years. I'm not sure if they're still going on now, but there has been an alliance there. Iran has been interested in Venezuela because of its geographical proximity to the U.S. And that's, something that Cuba has done over the years as well. I mean, they've always had a close relationship with Russia, mostly as a way to kind of defend themselves against U.S. power. So yeah, getting some of these guys out of the hemisphere would be a good goal. I don't think it's a goal worth going to war about. And I think it's important to remember, too, that Russia and China both are kind of looking at Venezuela as a loser right now. I mean, they're not putting any new capital in there. They're kind of just, they want to keep a toehold in the country and influence there, but they've been reticent to pour more capital in there because the Venezuelan regime has just been such a disaster in terms of managing the economy or assets that it has.
Kate, you get the last word today, but on the point about responding to this conspicuous display of Chinese military hardware, is there any inkling in President Trump's Washington of a real U.S. defense buildup? I mean, I keep seeing stories this week about how there's another government funding deadline coming down the pike, and we don't know if we're even going to get a full budget or whether we're going to get some kind of temporary continuing resolution funding mechanism. I mean, what is the state of that argument in D.C. right now?
Look, I think sometimes the public is reluctant to hear that we need to spend more on our defense, but we spend about 3% of our economy, which is about half of the 6% we spent at the peak of the Cold War when Ronald Reagan was building up the military to try to defeat the Soviets. And at that time, we only had one real competitor, nuclear competitor that way. And now we have this axis that we're talking about and this dual threat from Russia and China. So look, we're at historic lows, and I don't see really any indication yet that we're going to get off that trend line. The president proposed a relatively flat defense budget. He wants to fill in some potholes with his big reconciliation bill that included money for defense in it that passed earlier this year. But he's not given a lot of insight even to his thinking for next year or the years to come, or how he wants to how large should our Navy be for a potential scenario, a blockade or invasion scenario in Taiwan. We have not seen yet a real strategy or an interest in increasing the defense budget. And so I think that really is at the core of the takeaway from this military parade, because I mean, it's an opportunity to explain to the American public, like, look, we have not invested in our defenses since that Reagan buildup in the 1980s, when we've delayed a lot of modernization. And after the Cold War, we just assumed we don't need a lot of stuff. We'll be able to control the air and we won't need to shoot a lot of missiles. And so we won't make a lot of stuff. And all of those assumptions now are being very rigorously challenged by the Chinese military. And so this is a moment where Trump could pivot and educate the public on the way the threats have changed. But I don't see a lot of opportunity to do that. And to your point, Washington is currently just engaged in another dysfunction about how to fund the government. And it's an open question whether the Pentagon will get a full year budget at all, or if it will be stuck on one of these stopgap continuing resolutions, which really just, they waste a bunch of money. They make it hard to start new contracts, new projects. They drain a lot from military readiness funds. So that would be, I think, a real sign that the Trump administration hasn't gotten serious about this yet. And they control the government now. They control Congress. And so at some point, I think the Trump administration is going to have to really get serious about national defense, or, as our editorial said today, risk losing a shooting war that this axis of adversary seems increasingly at least willing to entertain.
Thank you, Kate and Mary. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.